Hey everyone, welcome back. Get that coffee. So if you're new here, welcome to Community Compute, where we really advocate for free and open source software, and we try to make it accessible to the average person. But today I want to talk to you about Arch Linux, specifically about getting started with Arch Linux if you're a beginner. Maybe you've been interested in using Arch Linux, but you've been a little bit intimidated, right? It does have a bit of a reputation in the Linux community for good reason. But in reality, it does expect kind of a minimum level of competence from its users, but it's not a particularly high bar. So I want to walk you through kind of how to install Arch, some of the basics of using it, and really just kind of remove those barriers from you, because I think it really is a great distribution. It's my second favorite distro. It's community run. You have very easy access to all the latest and greatest software, the latest features of the Linux kernel. And I really do think it's a great experience, even for new users, if you're willing to put the time and the effort into learning it. So let's get started. Oh, one thing before I forget. I wanted to introduce you to our new channel mascot, and I just released a poll so that we can name him together. Open to suggestions as well if you want to leave it in the form of a comment. But he's a cutie. It's Tux riding GNU, with a little bit of an artistic flair added on top. But yeah, I hope you like it. Investing a little bit into the channel branding, so expect more of that to come. Okay, first order of business, go ahead and head to the Arch Linux website, archlinux.org. Head to the top right, download, and then just find the mirror closest to your location. Go ahead and download that ISO image, and then go ahead and burn it to a USB drive. So we did something very similar in the Debian install video. You can use something like Balena Etcher, Rufus. There's plenty of tools that allow you to do it very easily. So just go do that. Once you're ready, come back and join me. Okay, so go into your BIOS settings, find the security tab or the security area, find Secure Boot, go ahead and disable that setting. The Arch ISO does not support Secure Boot, but we will set up Secure Boot later. Secondly, go into your boot order and make sure your USB drive is listed first in order. Once you've done all that, go ahead and save and exit. Okay, so go ahead and boot from that USB drive, and you should be presented with this screen once you're there. We will go ahead and install Arch Linux, the first option. So I'm doing this from a virtual machine. I'll switch over to bare metal after we do the initial install, and I'll show you how to just set up Secure Boot and do some of the other kind of last mile config options to really set you up for success. Okay, so now we're here in the Arch install and interface. Okay, so this part of the process may differ really depending on your setup, right? If you have an Ethernet wired connection, this should be very seamless. You won't have to do anything additional. But if you're using Wi-Fi, you'll have to do a bit of additional config here. So let me walk you through what that will look like. So I do have a wired connection, but I can still illustrate what you'll need to do if you're using Wi-Fi. So you need to use the IWCTL utility. So you just type IWCTL. That brings you to the tool. And you can see I have the IWD hashtag there. It's ready to take commands. So effectively all I need to do is type help. I can see the commands that are available. What you'll need to do is go station list, and I don't have any Wi-Fi devices, so nothing will appear here, but you'll see the name of your Wi-Fi device here in the station list. So just remember that. Once you've got the name, you'll just need to go station, whatever your device name is. So I'll just call it my device. And then you'll go get networks. And it will return a list of the Wi-Fi networks. As I said, I don't have anything connected, so you won't see it here, but you'll see a list of Wi-Fi networks available. You'll remember the name, or you might already know your SSID, but once you have that, just type station, your station name. So again, I'll just call it my device. And then you'll go connect, and then type your network name. So I'll just put in a placeholder, right? Network name, and then your password. So my password will be my stand-in. And then boom, it'll connect to your Wi-Fi network, and then you're all good to go. And then to get out of that tool, just type exit. And then you're ready. So you're connected and you're ready to complete the rest of the process. So what we're going to do now is actually use the archinstall script. So a lot of people say you shouldn't use archinstall, you should go through the process manually. I actually disagree. I think, you won't actually learn that much just by, copying commands by rote. I think you'll learn more just by using the system. And I'll walk you through some of the basics here with archinstall so you're not doing it blindly. Just pay attention to the options we're choosing. Make sure you follow along appropriately, because if you don't, you might run into issues later. But also you'll learn a little bit at a very high level about everything that we're setting up. Now, you don't need a deep knowledge to start using Arch, but over time you'll start to accumulate more knowledge. You'll learn to fix things as they break, if they break. Hopefully they won't. But yeah, so you'll just learn by using the system. Don't let anyone try to gatekeep and say you shouldn't use archinstall. It exists to be used. It exists to streamline the installation process. So let's use it. So yeah, just go ahead and type arch install, and that will go ahead and run this automated installer. It updates itself as needed. Okay, so now we're in the archinstall tool. So it's a command line utility. Unlike the more GUI-based or graphical installers you might be familiar with in other Linux distributions. But I actually find that it's pretty easy to use. Just don't be intimidated by the text interface. And it's a lot more powerful in a lot of ways compared to, for example, the Debian installer or the Calamares installer that so many distributions ship with. So go ahead and select your language. Obviously, I'm a native English speaker, so I'll leave that. Mirrors. Choose your mirror region. This isn't necessary, but I do think it will probably improve your download speeds. I'll choose United States, go back, and you just navigate these menus with the arrow keys, right, up and down, and then press enter on the commands. So I press enter, it brings me back. Okay, so now we'll skip down to disk configuration, and I'll talk through each of these as I select options. Then click partitioning, and we really don't need to complicate things here. I'm good with a basic layout, so we'll use a best effort default partition layout, and then just choose the appropriate device. In my case, it is this virtual block device, but for you, it might be an SSD or an HDD. You should be able to tell by the size of your device, more or less, which one to choose. But make sure you install it on the right drive. So we'll choose my block device. And then here's the file system. So Btrfs or Btrfs is kind of the more modern option here. It's got some additional features and functionality around, kind of file journaling, file system journaling. It improves some features around backup and rollbacks, but we really don't need that. I think we should just go with ext4. It's been around for a long time. It works. Let's keep it simple. So we'll choose that one. And yeah, that's all we need to do here. So now just go back. Okay, so we've got disk configuration defined. We'll just work our way down this list, right? So disk encryption, you can do that if you want. I don't. If I have files that I want to encrypt, I usually handle those, by the directory or individually. I don't worry about encrypting my entire home folder. So bootloader, go ahead and leave it at system deboot. You can use grub, but I wouldn't recommend it for this, because if you want to follow along with me and set up secure boot, I think you should probably just keep it, as I'm doing. You'll notice system deboot is actually much faster. It's a much more simple bootloader, so we'll just go with that one unless you have like a specific use case for dual booting or something like that. Don't bother with unified kernel images. We'll just skip that for now. Swap we'll leave as true, and we'll let it kind of handle its default swap size and everything. Your host name. So the actual name for your device, I'll leave it as Arch Linux, but go ahead and put in whatever name you want here that's relevant to you. And then root password. So pro tip here, just leave that blank. Don't even go into that, and it will automatically disable the root account for you, which is what we want, right? We just want to have one single sudo user, and we'll basically be able to do that by going down here to user account, clicking on that, clicking on add a user, entering a name. I'll enter my name, and I'll enter my password. A very weak password here for demo purposes. And yeah, and then it'll ask you, should Andrew or should your username be a super user, right? Sudo. I'll choose yes. Very important that you choose yes there. And then we'll just go to confirm and exit. All right, so this part is really important. Make sure you're following along closely here. But for profile, which is one below user account, right? For profile, go ahead and click into that. And then click into type. And since we're using this as a desktop, right, I assume you want to set up a desktop. That's really the best use case for Arch. I wouldn't use it on a server, but, to each their own, I suppose. Go ahead and choose desktop. And that will give us kind of a bare minimum set of packages and such to make, essentially to allow for a smooth desktop experience, right? Things like SSH, for example. So we'll go into desktop, and then we can choose kind of the baseline desktop environment we want. And they have a lot to choose from here. You can even choose window managers like Sway or Hyperland, but the big ones are going to be KDE Plasma and GNOME, of course. But I would recommend KDE Plasma, especially if you're just trying to get into Arch in the Linux world. It's very Windows-like, but it's also super customizable, more so than GNOME, which has a very specific workflow. I did a video on GNOME that you can check out if you're interested in that. I love both of them, but for most people, I think KDE Plasma is going to be where it's at. So let's choose that one for the purposes of this demo so that you can follow along. So we'll press enter on that one. And then it's going to ask us kind of the type, which we answered as desktop. Graphics driver, it defaults to all open source, which is actually what we want. Unless you're running an NVIDIA GPU, in which case I can't help you. This is for, AMD users, but if you're running an NVIDIA GPU, you have to choose something different here. And then greeter is SDDM. This is going to be your login screen, your greeter. We'll leave that as SDDM. That should work fine. Let's go back. Okay, so we set up the profile, right? Now, for audio, click into audio. Very important that we get this right, but choose Pipewire, the first one from the top. Pipewire is the newer audio server in the Linux world. It's much better than Pulse Audio. It's just important that you set this one up. So Pipewire. And then for kernels, Arch allows you to specify a specific type of kernel. We'll just go with the Linux kernel. There's really not that much difference between them. I know some people really like to hyper optimize their setup. But I've watched some videos where people do performance comparisons between the different kernels, and we're talking just a few percent difference. So let's keep it stable, keep it simple. Arch's motto is KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid. So let's do that. Let's kind of follow their example. And then additional packages, we can specify that. I wouldn't recommend that for now. We'll install everything we need later. Let's just get out of this installer as quickly as we can. Network configuration, super important. If you don't do this right, you'll have to actually, connect to the internet, connect to your network through the command line. And I imagine that could trip a lot of users up. So click into network configuration here. Very important that you choose Use Network Manager, which allows you to basically graphically configure your network in the major desktop environments like GNOME and KDE Plasma. So use Network Manager. Make sure you do select that, otherwise you might be in for kind of a bit of confusion later. Choose your time zone. For me, US East, but choose accordingly. And then optional repositories. So this one I do think is important to call out. We want to include the multilib repository because that actually allows us to install packages from multilib, which is a repository that contains a lot of 32-bit packages. And you might be asking, why would I want 32-bit stuff if I'm running a 64-bit system? Because Steam and many games do require 32-bit packages to work. There's a lot of legacy stuff in that space, so we just want to make sure we select multilib under optional repositories. And you could just install Steam through a Flatpak and not have to worry about that, but I think the whole point of using Arch is that you have the latest and greatest. So it is kind of nice to be able just to install Steam through the native package through Pacman. And it just runs like butter. It's really nice, and it integrates with the system better. Okay, so that's everything. Make sure you did all that, and then we'll just go ahead and press install. So you can actually save this configuration and reuse it later. We won't worry about that. Let us click install, and then just confirm with enter, and we'll let it do its thing. Okay, once the install is finished, it will ask you if you want to chroot into the system to perform additional configuration. For us, we don't. We'll just go ahead and select no. It will reboot after we tell it to. So just go ahead and type reboot, and then we'll load into our desktop environment. Okay, here we are. This is KDE. This is the SDDM greeter. So I'll go ahead and log in. You'll notice the default session is Wayland, which is good. So put in your password. Let's log in, initialize this desktop environment. And here we are in the KDE Desktop Environment. You'll notice Conky here, that cute little mascot. So I'll just close this out. And let's go ahead and get our scaling right so it looks good for you on the other end. Okay, so in order to set up Secure Boot, we'll need to get back into the BIOS and we'll need to enable Secure Boot mode. So find the security section, go into Secure Boot, and for me, I click Clear Secure Boot Keys, and then I reset the platform to setup mode. Yours might be different. Just go ahead and look it up based on your motherboard or model number. And yeah, just go ahead and put it in setup mode. Okay, so you might remember at the top of the video, we disabled Secure Boot. What we'll do now is go ahead and set it up. So this will only work for AMD users because AMD graphics drivers are open source. So if you do have an NVIDIA GPU, you'll have to either do your own research or you can just skip this step. It's not necessary. So let's run sudo pacman sy sbctl. sbctl is a Secure Boot utility we can use to set up Secure Boot here. So we'll go ahead and let that run. And then once that's installed, we will go ahead and check our status. Okay, so now we'll run sbctl status. That will show us our current Secure Boot status. Of course, make sure you're using sudo. Enter your password. And this should show us that we are in Secure Boot setup mode. If I can get the password right, there we go. So we can see setup mode is enabled, which is good. That's what we want. So now we can go ahead and start the configuration. So we'll run the command to create our keys, sudo sbctl create keys. That will go ahead and generate the keys for us. Now we'll enroll Microsoft's keys. So sudo sbctl enroll keys -m. And now we'll go ahead and sign our boot files. So these you can just kind of copy and paste from the description where I'll include them because there's quite a bit of text here. But just make sure you get both of them. Make sure you get a success message with a check mark as you see here. Both should be signed, including the kernel boot file there. All right. Now we will run bootctl install. And that succeeded, but you see two error messages. You may or may not see these, but if you do see them, I'll show you how to fix them later in just a minute. Okay, so now we'll run sudo sbctl verify. It looks like everything is good. You should see all green check marks here. We're all signed and ready to go. Now I'm just installing the micro text editor here. I just prefer it. You could also use Nano, which should already be installed on your Arch Linux distribution here. So now let's open etc fstab with micro. Okay. What you'll want to do here is find your boot entry. So the entry here, /boot, and then we'll need to change the fmask and the dmask values. So just go ahead and paste those in. That's why I like micros. You can use the mouse. So fmask should be 0137, and then dmask should be 0027. Go ahead and save that and quit out, and Secure Boot is now set up. So you'll just want to enable Secure Boot in your BIOS by rebooting, getting back into your BIOS entry menu, and enabling Secure Boot, and then go ahead and reboot. And once we've done that, you should be able to run sudo sbctl status once again, and you should see that everything looks good and that Secure Boot is enabled. Okay, we'll close this, and our first order of business is going to be setting up our firewall. So we'll set up uncomplicated firewall, which is a very basic firewall. Just make sure you can see the text size here. Might as well go full screen. All right, so we'll run some commands. So we did touch on this just a bit before when we installed the Secure Boot tool, sbctl, but I want to take the time to explain it now. So Pacman is Arch's package manager, and to install applications or packages, it's very simple. You just go sudo pacman -s, capital S, very important that it's capital, and then you type the name of the package. So in this case, it's UFW, which is uncomplicated firewall. And we can do all these together, but I want to do them step by step just so you can follow along. So we'll do that. Just need to enter our password and then click yes or press enter because it's the default. And that will go ahead and install uncomplicated firewall. Okay, with that installed, that's excellent. Let's go ahead and set it up. So this is something you'll only need to do once, right? We're going to do it together. Your firewall will be good to go from then on, unless you need to make minor modifications like, allow additional applications through the firewall, for example. So what we'll do to configure it is sudo UFW default allow outgoing, right? We want to, by default, allow outgoing traffic. So we've made that configuration. Now sudo UFW default deny incoming. So we want to deny incoming traffic by default unless we have an explicit rule allowing it. Okay. And then for example, on Debian and other distributions, you can use UFW to enable itself. But in Arch, we need to use systemctl, which is part of systemd. Sudo systemctl start UFW. And that will go ahead and start the UFW service. That's just for this session though, right? If we turn our computer off and back on, UFW will not be running at that point. So we also need to sudo systemctl enable UFW. And that will actually go ahead and launch the service every time we turn on the computer, every time we start a session. So you won't ever have to worry about it. It will just keep running unless you take further action. So there we go. There's our basic firewall setup. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll install, let me go ahead and clear this so our mascot's not in the way. We need to install TTF Liberation. And this is not an absolute necessity, but it does help. So TTF Liberation is essentially a collection of Microsoft-like fonts that are open source. So this is particularly applicable to applications like Steam that use fonts like Arial in the UI, and it will just look much better and render better if we have these fonts on our system. So what we'll do is go to sudo Pacman S, and then we'll install TTF Liberation, and go ahead and press enter, or type Y and press enter. And there we go, we've installed those fonts. So for example, Steam will look much better, much closer to its native form. Okay, then just some additional housekeeping. A few apps I like to install, and these are part of the KDE suite, but with Arch, you get a very, very minimal install of all the desktop environments, including KDE, and that's great because it allows you to really craft the system the way you want it, and that's what Arch is all about, right? But there are some apps that we really should have, and we want just kind of the most basic KDE versions of those apps for things like viewing images, perhaps, taking screenshots. Those are basic functions that we definitely want, and it's not going to make our system bloated or anything, don't worry. We can kind of pick and choose what we want. I'm just going to help you craft like a bare minimum viable system, desktop system. And by the end of this video, you'll be ready to go. Okay, so let's start with GwenView, which is KDE's image viewer. So we'll do sudo, I'll clear this first just so we don't have as much noise to deal with, but sudo Pacman S GwenView. And go ahead and enter or press Y enter. There we go, we've got GwenView installed. Now we can view images, PNGs, JPEGs, GIFs, what have you. We can view them. We have an application on the system to do that. Okay, so now we'll install Spectacle. So sudo Pacman S Spectacle, and this is KDE's screenshot utility. So we'll do that. There we go. Spectacle is on the system. So just to kind of give you a very brief demo of both of those, right? I'll minimize my terminal here. If I press print screen, Spectacle will pop up. That's the screenshot utility on KDE. And you can do full screen, active window, rectangular region. You can even record video. You can mark up your screenshots. It's actually a really nice, nifty tool. So there we have it. Let me just take a full screen screenshot just so that we can open it in GwenView. So I'll show you GwenView too. If we open that image, now we've got a little basic image viewer here with GwenView, which is KDE's sort of native image viewer. And the rendering is slow and wonky because I'm in a VM, but KDE is really smooth. It's really good looking and modern. So, I think you'll really enjoy it. Okay, there we go. So back to the terminal. 2 additional things you might want to set up for a basic MVP system would be a web browser and Flatpak. Now with Arch, you really don't need Flatpak because you have access to all the latest and greatest generally, but hey, it can't hurt to have it. So we'll just go through sudo pacman s, we'll go Firefox. That is a well-known open source web browser, really recommend it, but you can install Chrome or whatever your favorite browser is as well. We've got Firefox, okay. So now we'll do sudo pacman s Flatpak. And there we go. So we can install Flatpak apps as needed. Just go to flathub.org to browse what they have. And if you can't find something in the Pacman Arch repo, you can definitely find it here. All right, so if you're using Arch, it might be very possible that you're interested in gaming, right? Arch is a great distro for gaming because you've got the latest kernel, you have the latest Mesa user space drivers, and yeah, in general, it's just a great setup for gaming. What we'll be doing now is installing some dependencies of Steam, some 32-bit, mostly graphics driver dependencies. This is for AMD. You will need to do a bit of research if you have an NVIDIA card. I'll put a link in the description that explains how to do this on Manjaro for NVIDIA users. And that's going to be the same as it would be on Arch Linux. So you can just follow that guide, install those dependencies, and then join back up with us when we go to install Steam. Okay, so for my AMD users, we'll start with sudo pacman s, and we'll do a needed flag, which will essentially just not install packages that are already on the system. So first we'll do lib32 mesa. So these are going to be our 32-bit Mesa drivers, user space drivers. We'll do Vulkan Radeon, which we probably already have. lib32 Vulkan Radeon, which would be our 32-bit Vulkan drivers. And then we'll do our Vulkan ICD loader. And then lib32 Vulkan ICD loader. And then go ahead and run that. And we will commit to the install. All right, so now the moment of truth, we can go ahead and install Steam. So it is very easy to do in Arch, luckily. So we'll go with sudo pacman s Steam. There we go. And easy as that. I can open Steam now and log in, and it should work pretty flawlessly. All right. So we now have kind of a base MVP desktop system where we can game, we can do software development, we can just be, any kind of desktop user, right? Even if we just want to use it for web browsing, it's a great system for that. And then we have a wonderful desktop environment in KDE, which is very modern. And the good thing about Arch is we'll always be on, essentially the latest and greatest version of KDE. So currently I believe it's in the family of 6.1. So you'll have all the latest and greatest features of your desktop environment. It's really a great distro, great way to learn more about Linux. And with what you learned today, I think you'll be ready to run with it. You might, run into a few issues here and there, but just consider those learning opportunities. But in general, it's a very stable distro. But before we part today, the way you update in Pacman is just through sudo pacman syu. So capital S, lowercase yu. That's how you do your general system update. And of course, I don't have anything to update today, but in general, when you're using Arch, you want to update relatively frequently. You don't want to let a lot of time pass between updates. I'm talking months, weeks or months, because that's when you can start running into instability issues. That's when you'll actually have to do research into which packages you should upgrade and what order. And you'll have to kind of read through the Arch documentation to figure that out. But if you stay relatively up to date, let's say at, bare minimum once a week or even better, every time you use the machine, you'll be in really good shape. It will be a very stable operating system. One final thing that I actually forgot. If you're an Arch user, you like to let other people know that you use Arch Linux. So one of the best ways to do that is to customize your start menu, your application launcher here. So I'd recommend you go out to Google and find an Arch Linux logo of some kind. So we'll find one, Arch Linux logo. I like this one from Icon Finder. Nice round logo here. Go ahead and download that. PNG is fine. 512 or 256 should be plenty. I actually already have one. Just wanted to show you where you can get one. And then right click on the panel here, right over the application launcher. Choose Configure Application Launcher. Go ahead and click the icon up here. This is the default KDE icon. Then choose, go down to Browse, and go ahead and select that image you just downloaded. Mine is over here in Pictures Icons, archicon.png. We'll open that bad boy. There we go. Apply it. And now everyone knows, if they're shoulder surfing us, they know we're using Arch Linux. It's also just really handsome. Lends a nice touch, a nice elevated aesthetic touch to the desktop. So yeah, that's the capstone of our Arch setup. A good looking desktop. Make sure you set a nice wallpaper like I have here. This is my actual current desktop you're seeing. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to stay curious and take care.